By the end of this video, you'll learn the 3 ingredients that make up great melodies, how to create a melody from scratch, and how to make sure your audience remembers it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Zach Heidi. I'm a composer and a content creator here on YouTube, and I do weekly tips and resources for composers like you. So first things first, there's some basic principles of what makes a good melody. Now, melodies can vary. We can have really short, condensed, motivic melodies, but we can also have really long, expansive melodies. So the advice varies, but there are 3 basic principles that you almost always follow. The first one is called the whistle factor. The whistle factor is making sure that you're staying within a reasonable range that could be whistled by somebody. Typically, that range is about 1.5 octaves. So if our melody was in C major, we'd typically want to go no higher than this G, or in some cases, no lower than this F. And if you think of any good melody, they almost always follow this principle. If we take Somewhere Over the Rainbow, right, there's our lowest note. So there is our range. If we take Star Wars, there's our range. If we take Harry Potter, right? So there's our range. So always staying within 1.5 octaves. It's a really good principle. It's going to make sure that it's singable. The next principle is to use melodic and rhythmic motives together. Now, if you don't know what a motive is or a motif, it's a short musical cell. Just like we've got cells in our bodies, music has cells. It has little ideas. The most classic example would be Beethoven, and all the ways that that gets varied through the entire piece. So this variety is what helps us recognize the cells of a piece of music. In the same way, you want to make sure your melody actually has cells baked into it. The cells can be melodic, in other words, pitch-based, but they could also be rhythmic. And a really great example of this is Indiana Jones. If you think of Indiana Jones, we have both pitch motives, but we also have a rhythmic motive. Bum, ba bum, bum. Bum, ba bum. Bum, ba bum, bum. So you can see that we have identifiers for both aspects of that music that helps to make it memorable. Finally, the third principle is to make sure you have some rising motion in your melody. If you were to draw out most melodies, you'd see this. You'd see a rise, it would hit its peak, and then it would gently drop off. You don't want the peak to happen halfway through because you've already kind of used up the excitement of your piece and are now just decaying. So you want to build to that moment near the end and then just have a slight drop off. A great example of this is John Williams' E.T. theme. Watch and see how it rises through the duration of the melody. So builds and builds and builds, finally has a very slight decay at the end of that. Although the next time it goes, so there's even more build. So quick recap, keep your melody to 1.5 octaves, make sure you're using some motivic cells in your ideas, and make sure that you have a rising motion. With all that in mind, let's talk about different ways you can approach creating a melody, because sometimes you get stuck and you don't know where to start. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Spitfire Audio. They are running a spring sale, which includes several bundles where you can save 50 to 60% off, and some really good VSTs in there, like the Olafur Arnald series, which they sent me, the Eric Whitacre Choir, the Firewood Piano, and more. My favorite patch right now is the chamber grid from the Olafur Arnald's Chamber Evolution series. I'm really into this. I immediately added it into my template. You can play a note, and there's all these like micro tunings, but you can also go in and change with different effects. So you could make it subtle. You could add some thrills. And for a composer like me who just needs something really quick that has a really evocative sound, this is a great fit. If you're in the market, be sure to check it out. I've linked it in my description, and it's running until May 4th. Now back to the video. The first thing we could do is start off with a very small idea, a small motive, and use that as our building blocks for the melody. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I want a little idea that goes like this. Okay, so I'm gonna wanna follow my ear, obviously, but try and use this as the shape. Pay attention to the shape, the intervals, and the rhythm. See See how the second part, I actually used the rhythm from the first part? And we have a rising motion. Now this isn't the end of the melody. Maybe I want even more rise. So the second part goes. So I'm building as I go. So I changed it a little bit, but you see the idea. I'm working with these small melodic cells and rhythmic cells and building as I go. That's a great way to write a melody. It'll include, needing to know a little bit of harmony as well, but that's the basic principle. The next way you could write a melody is actually starting with a shape, a very basic shape, and embellishing it. As we talked about, most shapes are going to do this as the melody goes. So we can work that shape and then sort of elaborate. Now to create a shape in music, I'm just going to play something and kind of play a gesture. So I'm keeping it mostly to just chord tones, but this is our shape. You can see we kind of rise and then fall and then rise back up again. So what we could do now is actually start to embellish this and ornament it a little bit. So instead of maybe we go. So it's the same shape, but I'm embellishing. I'm using my ear, basically, to lead me, but I'm also using the shape to guide me. One final way you could create a melody from scratch is to start with a cool interval, an interval that kind of inspires you. Lots of great melodies start off with really noticeable intervals. If we take some John Williams music yet again, and we pay attention to some of those intervals in the beginning, right? We start off with this great interval. Or we also have. So. Or. We also have. So instead of starting with a shape or a motivic idea, we could use an interval as our gestation for the melody. So let me start with an interval that inspires me, maybe a minor seventh. So that might inspire ideas. So you can see I'm using that interval to lead the idea, and the interval is really the motive. Now the final aspect, and maybe one of the most important, is how do you make sure your audience actually remembers your melody? You can't force them to memorize it, but you can build elements into your music to make sure that it works. And this is going to start to border on a little bit more abstract thinking of composition, but for me this has always worked, and so I have to recommend it to you all. The strategy that I use, other than the craft of what makes a good melody, is to misremember your melody and adjust accordingly. Let me show you what this looks like in action. So let's say I'm writing a melody. So I've written this melody. Now here's what I want to do. I want to walk away from this melody. In fact, I am going to walk away from this melody for 30 minutes, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to try and remember what I did. So goodbye. Okay, we're back. Now, I don't remember the melody at all, so I will have to listen for a second just to get an idea, but I'm not going to pay too much attention to it. So I'm just going to listen for a second and see. Okay. Now, here's what I want to do. I don't want to review the melody anymore. I want to actually try and play it again, the way I think it went, and we'll notice what changes. Now let's compare what I did now to what I had originally and see if I was close. Now let's listen to the new one. So I'm more partial to the new one. And I think that's because what happens over time is as we get these ideas in our head, we want our audience to memorize it, right? We want them to remember it. Well, if we can't remember our own melody, how could we expect anybody else to remember? So the idea is to sort of use your memory as a process of extracting what's memorable about your melody. And that takes time, right? You have to make sure you have space and time away from your melody to make sure it really sticks. So this is the way I like to work. I like to misremember and adjust accordingly. You might still make tweaks. You're a craftsperson, so obviously you're gonna go in and adjust things as you need to. But memory is a wonderful tool to make sure your piece is memorable. Now the next part of this process, which is not part of this video, is I'm gonna actually orchestrate this melody. If you wanna see that, I have that available on my Patreon, which I hope you'll check out. Thank you again to all of my patrons. You are the ones that help me make this content, so I appreciate it very much. And if you found this video helpful and inspiring, please do leave a like, subscribe for more, and be sure to check out my free composer newsletter, which is linked in the description.